So, continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Virtual Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present Katie Windahl and Jack Marsick. Katie has been an assistant professor of English as a second language at, Katie, let me see if I'm pronouncing this right, Cuyahoga?
That's right, Cuyahoga Community College.
Wonderful, in Ohio, since 2002. She has an undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in English from Cleveland State University. She inherited her mother's interest in family history, but that interest became a passion after her sixth grade teacher assigned the class a genealogy history project. After learning the genealogical ropes of her maternal family history, where the most recent immigrant arrived in the U.S. in the early 19th century, she decided to tackle the more difficult Eastern European paternal family history. Along the way, she and her father, Jack, discovered many family secrets and new appreciation for the culture that neither of them knew they had. Jack is a retired school administrator from Cleveland, Ohio. He has been a teacher, a counselor, principal, and administrative assistant to the superintendent, and is currently president of a consulting service specializing in leadership development. He's a father of 3 daughters and a grandfather of 8. He became interested in his family history as a small boy growing up with his grandmother, when he wondered why he didn't have a grandfather. He was told several different stories by various relatives that could not be verified. His daughter Katie's interest in family history rekindled his search for finding the truth out about what happened to his grandfather. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Katie and Jack.
All right. Thank you very much, Suzanne. All right, I'm gonna have my dad start the story because really this story starts before I was born.
First, I want to start by thanking Suzanne for giving us an opportunity to present to you and to your class a very personal journal. That's a journey that started way back in the 1940s when I was a young boy growing up. The war had broken out. And I had 3 uncles. All 3 uncles went off to the war. My mother, who was one of 6 children, had 2 sisters, younger sisters. So we spent a considerable amount of time with my grandmother, who did not speak English, and really was in a position that she needed a lot of help to survive during the war. During the time that I was there, I often asked. There was only women in the house. No men, and I would say, well, where's my grandfather? I knew where my uncles were. And at first, nobody really gave me any feedback. But eventually, I was told a story. And the story was that one day he went to work and never came home. And he supposedly went back to Europe. And after he had been back there for a while, he was to have sent a letter to my grandmother saying he was saving up money for her to come back to Europe. At that point, my grandmother said she had no desire to go back to Europe and pretty much destroyed all contact or eliminated all contact with my grandfather. That's what I was told. In 1960, my mother passed away with cancer. I was still a young teenager at the time and had a young sister. But prior to my mother dying, she handed me her Bible, and she said that she wanted me to have this as part of the heritage of our family and to keep it. And after she died, I was looking through the Bible one day and I came across this picture. And on the back of the picture, it said Father. And that was the only known picture, and that's the first picture and only picture that I was aware of a man that I assumed was my grandfather. And I still did not have any clue as to what happened to him. I asked my aunts, got a lot more varieties of stories, but nobody ever really said exactly what happened to grandfather, except I assume he went back to Europe, to Hungary, and that someday I would be able to trace him down and either find him or find out where he was buried. So that's the background, the beginning of the story, quite clear back in the 1940s. My grandmother, which is on the left here, is holding Katie, and this picture would be about 1967, right after Katie was born. There's a later picture of her on the right-hand side. As you can see, she really made no attempt to change her culture. She came from Europe, she came over here, and she brought her culture with her, never learned English, and so we adjusted to her and to her lifestyle. which was nice at that time. I was not aware that there was any issue. We loved our grandmother very, very much, and she was a very kind woman who baked tremendous pastry.
All right. So we're going to fast forward a little bit here to 1978, and I'm
Katie,
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a little pop-up on your screen that says stop sharing and hide. Can you just click hide?
Oh, thank you. Okay. My first time using Blue Jean. So we fast forward to 1978, and my sixth grade teacher assigned us a project to do our genealogy, or to write about our family history. Well, I was enthralled. My mother had always been interested in genealogy, and if you look at the bottom of this chart that I made in sixth grade, you can see that my mom's family, we knew relatives going way back. This represents probably the late 1700s that we knew at that point. And they were all still in the United States. All the records were in English. My mother had been interested in it, so she had gathered lots of family stories. Her grandmother had been interested in it and had gotten lots of family stories. So I had lots of information on my mom's side of the family, but I had very little information on my dad's side of the family. And Dad didn't seem to know very much. His grandmother was deceased at this point. So, and my father's mother, Mary Connish on this chart, she died in 1960, so I couldn't ask her anything. So I wrote a letter to her younger sister, my great aunt Julia, and I asked her for any information that she might have. So she wrote me back, and this was the information that she gave me about her mother. She said that she had lived in Austria, that she came to America to escape an arranged marriage. She said that she came under an assumed name in 1912, and that she came under an assumed name because she didn't want her father to track her down here. She said that she met her husband, John Sinkanish, in a shoe factory in New York. She said that Maria didn't love him, but she married him because they were from the same village. She said that John died shortly after their last child was born in 1926, and that would have been my Aunt Julia, the one who was writing. So here was the first time where we had contradictory information, that my father had heard that his grandfather went back to Europe, and here I was told that he had died in 1926. And she also said that Maria never talked about her husband and burned all of his pictures and records around 1926. So that was the information that I got from Aunt Julia, which made for a really interesting story, but of course we didn't know how much of this was true or not true. The best piece of information, though, that I got from Aunt Julia was the marriage license. So here's the marriage license of Dad's grandparents, John Sinkanish and Maria Hajdanka. And they were married in New York. You can see here it was in January of 1913. And this marriage license was so helpful because not only did it have the name of each of their parents, which is going to become important later. You can see that John Sinkanish's parents were Michael Sinkanish and Anna Bitstranson. And Dad's grandmother, Maria Hajdanka, her parents were Eva Gutsan and Michael Hajdanka. And you're going to hear those names again. And it showed that they were both born in Hungary, so Hungarian, and that it listed villages where they were from. So they had that Dad's grandmother was from Ligetish, Hungary, and that his grandfather was from Hayazd, Hungary. So this gave us, really, really good clues as to where to look. Well, at that time, as most of you know, this part of the world was in the part of the Soviet Union, it was very hard to find those villages. So we really hit a dead end, besides getting the names of my great-great-grandparents from the birth or from the marriage certificate. We really hit a dead end for many years. Well, then I kind of put my genealogy aside for a while, and I came back to it in I don't know, about 10 years ago or so. And I was looking at the Ellis Island records, and I had previously found where Dad's grandfather came over right here, John Sincanish, and says he's 17, although he was probably really 19. I know many of you have probably discovered that ages are all kind of relative, especially for people that came from villages where celebrating birthdays or keeping records weren't all that important. But I noticed something when I went back to this a few years ago that I hadn't noticed before, and that was here where under race of people, it says Ruthenian. And I thought that was a word that I didn't know and I hadn't heard before. And it got me doing some research into what Ruthenian meant. So a quick Google search showed me that Ruthenians are also known as Carpatho-Rusyns, and they're an ethnic group of the Eastern Carpathians. They have a language that's very similar to Ukrainian. Some people think it's a dialect, some people think it's a related language, and that they've never had their own country. So the area that our relatives are from was controlled by Hungary for hundreds of years until 1919, when it became part of Czechoslovakia. And then it was part of Czechoslovakia until 1939. Then it was controlled again by Hungary until 1944, became part of the Soviet Union in 1944, and then it became part of Ukraine in 1991 after the fall of the Soviet Union. So, as my father said, we assumed that his grandparents were Hungarian, and they're on the census records it listed Hungarian, on the marriage certificate it says Hungarian, but they were probably ethnically not Hungarian. They were Ruthenian or Carpatho-Rusyn. All right, well, this also led to some challenges. Ruthenians have very interesting naming traditions, and our family kind of followed this. So for daughters, the oldest daughter is generally named Mary. The next daughter is usually named Anna. Now, we didn't have an Anna, but Dad's mother was Mary. And then there was Aunt Helen. And then they could be named after another relative or a biblical name. And we had Aunt Julia after that. For sons, the first son is generally named after the father. And then after the paternal grandfather, and then after the maternal grandfather, and then you could go off the board after that. And although in our family, Dad's uncles didn't exactly follow that order, but there was a Johnny who would have been named after his father. There was a George. There was a Michael. So it kind of followed that same rule. And one thing that's a little bit tricky is if a child died, then it was common to rename the next child by the same name. So just because you have a Mary doesn't necessarily mean she's the oldest born. If they had a Mary and then she died when she was like 2 years old, and then they had a subsequent child, they could also name her Mary, because apparently you have to have a Mary. right, so now that we know which part of the world we're looking in, we had some new challenges, some new obstacles to doing our research. So the first obstacle is it's very hard to find any kind of information from this part of the world. This is Gina Blogger, who has a lot of good information, especially on Jewish ancestry in this part of the world. But I'm just going to play for you a little snippet of one of his YouTube videos about doing research in Ukraine. And hopefully this works. Come on. Worked earlier.
Now, in my last video, I spoke in depth about my research in Kiev, and I mentioned a project being done by Alex Krakovsky, where he was digitizing records in the Ukraine.
Hi guys, my name is Alex, and I'm a genealogy researcher from Kiev, Ukraine.
Now, the work Alex is doing is immensely important because the Ukrainian archives are one of the hardest to access. As Alex explained to me, the Ukrainian archives were closed to the public for hundreds of years. And anyone who's ever done any Ukrainian genealogy research will have noticed that there's not a lot online. For one, the Ukrainian government has nothing where they're publishing any archives online. And while there have been a couple of different projects to digitize these records, they've only gotten to a small fraction of all of them. Some of the others. For anyone who's going to the archives in Ukraine, it's really hard to get in. There are long wait lists lasting a couple of weeks, even to months, just to get into the reading room to see records. Most of the staff at these archives do not speak English. They'll usually speak Ukrainian, and some of them may speak some other languages, but more than likely, you're going to need a translator with you when you go to the archives if you don't understand Ukrainian.
See, folks, chapter 13.
Sorry about that. Exactly what I didn't want to happen. All right, how do I get back to where I want to be here? Here we go. I hear my mom laughing in the background. All right, so we were up against that. There's very few records online. It's hard to get into the mafia-controlled archives in Ukraine. And I had some other problems. I wasn't sure exactly how to read the records, even if I could get access to them. Now, luckily, there is a big Ukrainian population in the Cleveland area. And just by happenstance, the office that I had at Cuyahoga Community College was right next to a math professor whose parents were Ukrainian, and she was very involved in the Ukrainian group that's here in Cleveland. And her name is Irina, and I just mentioned to Irina kind of in passing that I had discovered that my relatives were Ruthenian, and that I was starting to do research on that part of the world. And she was so excited, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, you're Ukrainian! Oh, this is great!" And she did two things that were really very helpful. First, she recommended that I contact the Ukrainian Museum Archives that's here in Cleveland. And then second, she arranged for the two of us to go to a conference in Pittsburgh that was a genealogy conference put on by the Ukrainian Historical Education Center. So I went to the archives one day after work, and I just stopped in, and I asked if they had any documents that might relate to the Ruthenians with the Carpathian part of Ukraine. And the gentleman who owned the archives there, who was the curator there, said that they really didn't have many records from that area, but that they just had a Fulbright scholar who had started working with the museum, and he was going to be in Cleveland for a year. He was Ukrainian, and he believed that this man had relatives in that area, and so he might know something about getting records from that area. And so he introduced me to the gentleman that you see here, Alexander Devich, who we call Alex. And Alex was very sweet. He sat with me for more than an hour, took down all of the information that I knew about my family, which wasn't much, but he took down the names of the villages, took down all of the surnames that he could find. He knew which area I was looking in, and he said that when he went back to Ukraine, he had a relationship with the archives in that region, and he thought that he might be able to find something for me. He also suggested that the best way to find information is to talk to the villagers. He said, you need to go look at the archives for yourself and talk to the villagers. And I said, but I don't speak Ukrainian. And he says, oh, don't worry. If you go to Ukraine, I'll meet you there. He says, I'm going back to Ukraine in May. If you come this summer, I'll meet you there. After I made contact with Alex, Irina and I went to Pittsburgh to the Ukrainian Historical Education Center conference, and I was able to confirm the place names that were different. So if you remember back on that marriage certificate that I showed you at the beginning, it showed the place names as Hayaj and Ligatesh as the names of the villages that Dad's grandparents were from. But those were the Hungarian names. Those same villages had Ruthenian names, which are now the Ukrainian names, and Hayaj was Volosyanka, and Ligatesh was Lu. So I couldn't find any information for Hayaj and Ligatesh because those are not the names of the villages anymore. And they were never apparently really the names that the villagers actually called those places. All right. And then one of the other challenges is that apparently the records that are in Ukraine, some of them are in Hungarian, like you can see on the right here. Some of them are in Church Slavonic, which is written in the Ukrainian alphabet, and it's kind of like it's what their churches used to take records, kind of like Latin for the Catholic churches here. And some of the records are in Ukrainian, but in our alphabet. So you can see three different ways to write the same place. But it was a big clue for me to find out that Hayaj, it was now Volosyanka, and Ligatesh is now Lu. And I was able to do that at the conference with the material books that they had there. So we kind of hit a dead end, and I just got to thinking more and more about what Alex had said about going to the villages and talking to the villagers. And this idea was just ruminating. And so I went to my parents and I said, how would you feel about going to Ukraine? Dad, you want to take it from there?
Yes. First of all, I asked to meet Alex because I wasn't sure whether he was wanting something from us or whether there was a cost associated with his helping us. So Katie set up a luncheon with the four of us, and we sat down. And immediately he impressed me with the sincerity of his quest of finding ancestors and where they had established in America, and the fact that he was a Fulbright scholar. He was a very bright young man, but more importantly, he knew the culture and he knew the language. And his expectation was that if we would come there, he would go out of his way to help us. And I didn't know how far exactly he was meant by going out of his way, but I took him at his word. And then I set up a situation with Katie, and I said, if we're going to go, just as a fail-safe, let's hire our own interpreter and our own driver, and we can visit these places in case it doesn't work out with Alex. She agreed, and so I said, okay, I'll finance this trip. Let's set it. You set it up, and we'll go. But my expectation was I wanted to find my grandfather's grave. I knew he was over there. Now we knew what village he was from. I was almost certain then that's where he returned, and he probably died, and that's where I would find his gravesite. Kind of bring closure to this venture that started way back in the 1940s.
And my expectation of this journey was going to be to find out more information about our family and to find out about the culture. I really, the only thing I could find out about the Ruthenians was or Carpathian Rus was what I could read online. There wasn't a lot, so I was hoping to uncover some ancestors that I didn't know and find something out about the culture. So we made our trip through Cobblestone Tours, which is out of Canada, and we flew into Lviv, which you can see right here in the western part of Ukraine, and we were met by an interpreter there, and we had our own driver. And we toured around, and eventually we went down here to Uzhgorod, which is by the arrow over here. And that is the capital of this state in Ukraine, which is called Zakarpattia, which means like over or under the Carpathians. And it's this little tip of Ukraine here that's near Slovakia and Hungary. And the villages that we were looking for were right up here, kind of where this little part of Poland juts out. It's about a 2.5 hour car ride up to the villages. But the archives that I wanted to go to that had information about those villages, those archives were located in Uzhgorod. All right. So we set off. All right, so we arrived in Uzhgorod. We were all very relieved when Alex actually did show up, because we really weren't sure whether or not he was going to. We found out later it was 14-hour train ride or something for him to get there from Kiev. But he got there, and he had some kind of a relationship with the university in Uzhgorod. And so he was able to get not just me, but also my parents into the archives. I don't understand much Ukrainian. I studied a tiny bit of it before we went, and I think he said something like they're researchers with me, and they just waved us through. And once we got there, this is kind of how if you see this picture on the right, this is how it looked. Alex called this the catacombs. These books are in no particular order. They're not temperature controlled. They're disintegrating. And it's really sad because they're not online anywhere. They don't require you to wear gloves to look at them. Alex is very upset about the conditions that these records are in, because they're losing them day by day. But while we were in the archives, we got another clue. We found this word Stavna, which is a village that's right next to L, and it said that there were Gutsans in Stavna. Now, if you remember back to my great-grandparents' marriage certificate, Dad's grandmother's mother was named Eva Gutsan, and we hadn't been able to find the birthplace the birth record for Dad's grandmother, and we thought, well, maybe she was born in Stavna, or maybe somebody in Stavna would know what was happening with the Gutsans. So the next day we were heading off on our tour of the villages, and we decided to stop in Stavna. Dad?
When we got to Stavna, we didn't know who to ask, so we're driving down the road, and there was a woman walking alongside the road. So we stopped, and Alex then asked if there was any place that he could get information about residents, and did they know of any Gutsans that lived in the village. And she looked around, and she pointed over across the river in this bridge. She said she believed that was a family there. So we backtracked, went over, and pulled up, and I used the word very lightly when I say bridge. It was a walking bridge, and there's a little video showing it, and I talk about it, but it went over this river, and in the river was a woman washing her clothes on rocks. I really felt like I was back in the 1940s and 50s when I was there. It was a very kind of a time-warped experience.
So, here we are with the mayor's secretary, who is taking us to the Gutsan farm to talk to the Gutsans to see if we can figure out if they know anything about our branch of the family. We'll see if this works this time.
Supposedly born here, and we're trying to get some information. This bridge is pretty rickety, lots of holes, broken boards. We think maybe our grandmother was born here, but we cannot confirm it. Great-grandma was here, yes. That's Alex and a local lady helping us out. There's the gentleman we're supposed to meet. He's sitting.
So anyways, everybody was very friendly. You can see, the mayor's secretary was willing to help. That Yura, who we met, was willing to help. It turns out that his wife is the Gutsan. Her name was Eva Gutsan, which was the same name as my great-great-grandmother. And Alex is doing the translating. I've got my notebook. We're trying to make a family connection. I couldn't make one immediately, but they told me what they knew about their parents and grandparents. And Eva says, well, maybe we want to walk down the road a little bit because her brother lives down the road. And he might know more information than we did. So we walked down the road to her brother's farm. And here's a little footage of that.
Ця хижа була покрита у вас. А це якого року? built 1947. This lady is the secretary of the mayor. That's what she is.
He's what?
The lady who showed us the way, she's the secretary of mayor.
Secretary of Mayor?
Tak, tak.
Aha, to ja wcześniej do kiedy radzie powiedzmy, że ja wrzucam kilka robię. Także robię radzie, ale że było po.
Ми вас забрали з роботи, ми вас підвеземо назад.
Ale pytaję, może ty tam rzeczy.
I get here. Hold on. Okay, there we go. So it turns out later that I believe that those are my dad's third cousins from information that I got from them, and then Alex and I went back to the archives after visiting the villages, and I found some more Gutsan information. But after Stavna, we headed down the road to Lug, which is only about, 2 miles away?
Right.
Okay.
And again, we see somebody walking alongside the road, and we stop. And at this point, we were looking for Haidankas. And we asked them, do you have anybody in this village by the last name of Haidankas? And a woman turned around and she said there was a tractor coming down the road, a 1950 Soviet rebuilt tractor, by the way. And she said the man driving that tractor was Michael Haidanka. Now, Michael Haidanka would be the Michael that Katie had talked about earlier. I got very excited that there was Haidankas. So we quickly jumped out of the van and went down there and started talking to Michael. Michael didn't really know anything. He was a young man, but he said maybe his father knew something. And so he got on his cell phone. Everybody seemed to have cell phones. He called up into the mountains. His dad was up there plowing. And pretty soon, here comes the gentleman walking down out of the mountains towards the road, the little village road. And as soon as I looked at him, I said to myself, that looks just like my Uncle George, mother's brother. And there's a picture of the two of us standing together. And he's a carbon copy of my uncle.
And so again, I've got my notebook out, and Alex is asking all of the questions, and we're trying to make a family connection, and I can't make an immediate family connection. But he says, Michael Haidanka says, well, my aunt lives down the road here. Her name's Anna. Let's walk down the road and see if she knows anything. And so we walked down the road, and you can see the picture of her here on the right. She was so excited to see us. She kept patting my father on the cheeks because, of course, it was hard to talk. We had to do all of the talking through Alex. She again, we couldn't make exactly the same connection, and it was difficult because all of the names were the same, Michael and Anna and Mary, John. But she was very sweet and really wanted to help us. And we said that after we were going to go back. We were going to go down the road to Volosyanka, which was where the Chinkanishes were from, Dad's grandfather. And she said that she believed that all of the Chinkanishes had left Volosyanka, but we could try. And she told Michael that he had to get in the van with us and go with us. And again, my Ukrainian's not very good, but I think he was trying to say, no, I think I need to go back. I was working in the fields. And she kept saying, no, you must, you must. So to be polite to his aunt, he got in the van with us and went down the road to Volosyanka and helped us find a cemetery there for a Greek Catholic church.
So we go to the cemetery. As you can see, I was very excited because I realized at this point, if my grandfather had returned, this is more likely where he would be buried. Unfortunately, the cemetery has not been kept up at all. It was overgrown with weeds, and the markers could be really couldn't read them. It was very, very disappointing, and I was getting discouraged because I felt that I made this trip, and I still didn't know whether my grandfather had returned to this village and whether he had died here and was buried here, and I wasn't sure where we were going to go at that point. While we were looking at this, if you recall, that woman that was walking along the street that we had seen in the previous village, she called Alex and said she remembered that there was another Haidanka back in that village, and we might want to interview her in Lou. So we all piled back into the van, turned around, and went back to Lou. As we're driving back to Lou, I noticed this woman sitting alongside of the road on the other side of a ditch under a pear tree, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's my grandmother. That looked exactly like my grandmother. And I got out of the car, and I even as telling this story, I get goosebumps all over my body because it was a carbon copy of my grandmother. As it turns out, she was the daughter of my grandmother's youngest brother. And she was a Haidanka, that she was born and raised in this village, that her father had built this home in 1936, and she had been living there since.
And she was named.
And she was named for my mother, Maria.
No, she was named for your grandmother.
Maria, right.
Yeah. And, we didn't even know that Dad's grandmother had a brother. So this was really very exciting. So not only did she know about our branch, she had known about our branch of the family, but we didn't know about her branch of the family at all. And here's a little video of us getting some of the story from her.
That Maria Haidanka, who went to the United States, married John Zinkanich from Bolosyanka in Pennsylvania. Yeah, so she knows that?
Ви знаєте, що Марія, яка поїхала в Америку, що вона Івана Цинканича там зустріла. І там вони кажуть, що вони зналися тут.
Ні, тут я не знаю, чи це знали, чи не зналися, але ми це там зустріли.
I'm not sure if they knew each other before going there, but they met there. She knows that.
Ми це там побирали.
А як ви знаєте?
Бо це знали, бо ми тут писали ці речі.
Писали, they were writing letters to us, so we know.
Okay, they wrote letters
А є
to
ці
you.
листи у вас у когось зберегли?
Нас зберігають.
Чи може було так, де наподіли, наша хата горіла, а то
Our house was in fire, so probably all the letters were burned.
Does she know what happened to John Zinkanich? Марія, попадаєтеся на того чоловіка, то чисто такий, як Михайло і Міро.
Looks like Mikhailo from Ushhorod and Miro.
Копія.
В Ужгороді
Ми поїдемо.
немає Гайданка, запише Міру.
То якщо ви знайдете їхні,
54-го,
якщо ви знайдете їхні телефони,
я телефон
знаєте, як
Василя, мабуть.
A couple of things that came out of there. One, what they were saying is that I was a copy, which meant that I looked exactly like other relatives in the family. But the other thing that she shared with it was my grandfather never came back to the village. So I discovered at that point that my search for my grandfather's grave was not going to be fulfilled simply because he had never returned. This is the younger brother, Stepan. My grandmother had a younger brother and two older sisters that I was never aware of.
Yeah, and so we learned a lot of information from the family. Like I said, we didn't know that they had been writing letters back and forth. Apparently, my great-grandmother had written a letter to her family in the 30s asking for some documents because she was trying to get citizenship in the United States. She was never a legal citizen here. And her letters were never returned. So we are guessing that she thought that her relatives were angry that she was trying to get U.S. citizenship. What actually happened is that at that time, that area was controlled by Czechoslovakia, which was basically under Nazi control, and the Nazis had intercepted the letters. So these relatives found out about the letters years later. Somehow these letters were unearthed, but by that time, that area was controlled by the Soviets, and the relatives weren't able to write back. So Maria told us that her father died in 1975, and that all of that time he had always wondered what happened to his sister. So it was really very heartwarming to be able to kind of close that gap for them.
And Maria took us into her home, which was very sparsely furnished, a home that she had been living in since the 1930s. She had very little in the way of modern appliances or anything else, but she did have a cell phone. Everybody seems to have a cell phone today. And she started calling all of the relatives, the nieces and nephews that lived in the area, and told them that there was relatives from America here. And she set up a meeting the following day at the hotel where we were to meet these relatives. So the next day, my wife and I sat in the lobby. We were supposed to be in at noon while Katie and Alex went back to the archives to do further research on the family. And while we were sitting there, in walked a gentleman with, I assume was his daughter, probably in her 20s or 30s, and a young girl that was like about 10 years of age. And I thought, and they were looking around, there was nobody else in the lobby, so I walked over to them and I asked if they spoke English. Well, they didn't, except the little girl did. And she's here in the front there, and she said who she was, that she was the relatives. And next thing I know, as we were talking, more and more showed up. I think the final count was like about 13 of the relatives showed up. We all spent the day together, went out to lunch, went out to dinner, and had breakfast with some of them the following morning. And it was a very emotional meeting because they never knew what happened to my grandmother, their aunt, and what happened when she went to America. I was able to fill that in, and of course, they were able to fill in a lot of information about the brothers and sisters that she had left behind. So
yeah, and this picture here is Dad with 4 of his second cousins and their families. And on the table here, you can see there's the American flag, the Ukrainian flag, and the Carpathian flag, the Carpatho-Rusyn flag. Yeah, we spent the day with them, and this is, I guess, a very traditional Carpathian-Rusyn type meal that we had. Everybody's toasting here.
What's it say?
The girl that I love, boy.
Пост родився за наших дітей, кого великий, кого малі, але всім нашим дітям, вашим, нашим дітям уже в нашому роду, нашим дітям бажаємо міцного здоров'я, щоб були достойними продовжувачами наших традицій. І берегли наш рід гайданків.
I got tradition, got toast, and haidanku. Okay, whatever.
Let's bring it for our kids. We're gonna
For our kids.
Ми вже не тільки гайданки, а вже інші мають.
We have too many others,
Але ми бережемо
and we keep haidanku going.
Yeah, this is my kid right here. Я хочу пам'ятати. В нашому районі Березнянському прізвище Гайданка було, баба каже, Славне.
I have to say that
Славне.
Region Гайданка, family name.
Ніколи не було стидно сказати, що ти з родини Гайданків.
It was never shame to say that you are Haidanka because the family had always good called the
Had a good reputation. Yeah, very nice.
Тому тим більше славно на сьогоднішній день, що ви, наша родина з Америки, прийшли, і тим паче, в тому числі для нас, нехай навіть локально прославили наших.
So even now you came from United States and on this local way you made our family famous.
All right. And I'd like to add that, this was 2018, and I'm Facebook friends and do Facebook messaging with both of the people that you saw giving the toasts in the video, and we've sent now letters back and forth, packages back and forth. We really did discover a branch of the family who was over there.
And we've invited them to come to America, but they cannot get visas unless one of them can get, but they must leave members of the family back there. And I think the fear on the part of the Ukrainian government is that once they come to America, they won't return to Ukraine. But the question still, I found out that my grandfather really had never returned to his village. He really had not died there and was buried there. So the question was, for me in my adventure, whatever happened to my grandfather? But we knew since he didn't go back, he must have spent the rest of his life somewhere in the United States. So Katie began to investigate that and went into quite a bit. There were several different misinformations. You want to share that, Katie?
Sure. So if you think back about the original information that we got from Aunt Julia, that her mother had lived in Austria, that she came to America to escape an arranged marriage. We asked the relatives about that. That didn't seem to ring true with them, but we're not sure about that. That she came under an assumed name in 1912. We're pretty sure she did come in 1912, so that part checked out, and she got married in January of 13. And I have never found her name, so I suppose it's possible that she came under an assumed name. Did she know John Sinkanish before she left Ukraine, or did she actually meet him here? Certainly, the families definitely knew each other, so it's possible that she had known him prior to that. So we're not sure. She married him because they were from the same village. Yes, we were able to confirm that. And the relatives also said that she didn't love him, which was interesting. He died shortly after their last child was born in 1926. We're going to talk about that one in a minute, but that ended up not being true. And finally, she never talked about her husband and burned all of his pictures and records. That was certainly true. We could not find any records of him in Dad's mother's stuff.
So
just some. Okay, wait. Let me do this part, and then you get to finish her off. So some things that we learned, or that I learned, I think, about doing genealogy research is that, obviously place names are important, but names and borders can change, so that gets really tricky. And certain places might be the same name, might be called by two different names at the same time. Also, there are cultural differences in terms of record keeping, religious land, immigration, court records. We expected to find cemeteries there. And even when we talked to the relatives and asked them if they knew where somebody was buried, they were kind of like, yeah, maybe, kind of. I think they're up there in the hills somewhere. Cemeteries just really weren't that important to them. Burial records didn't, church records, there were lots of church records, but not a lot of burial records. So that was something that was surprising for me. And talk to people. There were just so many, talking to Irina, talking to the people in the Ukrainian archives, meeting Alex kind of by chance, talking to all the people in the villages. I mean, we just had so many things that seemed like happenstance, but they were really because we just talked to as many people, and they told two friends and so on. And finally, you can't have preconceived notions of what you might find. What you might find might not meet your expectations. Sometimes not every story has a happy ending.
So we come to then what did happen to my grandfather. My grandfather died in 1956, about 40 some miles from where I was living at the time. He died in the Mansfield State Mental Hospital, which he was put in there about 30 years prior to his death. So for 30 years, he was a resident of the state mental hospital. We're not sure why he was put in there, who put him in there. All it says was paranoia. He could have been paranoid schizophrenic, but we're not sure. Those records were destroyed in a fire, and we've not been able to find any further information at this time. But the sad thing for me was I was 15 years old at the time when he died, very close. I could drive a car at that time. I would have loved to have seen my grandfather. But in those days, you didn't talk about mental illness. Now, there was a lot of mental illness in our family. Both my uncles had been in and out of mental hospital. My mother had been in and out of mental hospital. I became a mental health professional. We've had other problems within our family, but apparently somebody put him in there. I assume it was our grandmother, and never wanted to talk about him. In fact, she was on record as saying he wasn't worth talking about. And that was the most that I could get out of her at that time.
Yeah, so once we knew that he hadn't gone back to Europe, we sort of redoubled our efforts to find a death record here. And I knew that Dad's grandmother was living alone in the 1930 census. So I thought maybe he had died prior to 1930. It was only when I found him in the 1930 census in the Massillon State Mental Hospital that I was able to write to the Ohio History Center and get a copy of the death certificate. And only then did we find out when he actually died. And you can see part of the problem here is that his last name, instead of being Cinkanish, they had it as Chinkovich, which is not at all the same. All right, I guess that's the end of our presentation, and we will take questions at this time. Let's see if I can figure out how to get out of here. Okay.
Okay, let me check the chat box. Okay, let's see here. While people are typing in, I have a couple things. What tipped you off? I mean, obviously you found that he had not died in overseas as you had originally thought. What tipped you off to come back and look?
Well, so when I knew that Dad's grandmother was living in Youngstown at that time, and he knew approximately where the house was. So I looked through the records in Youngstown for any last name that seemed similar, and I finally found her last name that was misspelled very similarly to his last name. So then when I went into the search, I just started typing in any permutations of Chingovich instead of Cinkanish. And then we got that hit at in the 1930 census, because I'm like, he's got to be somewhere. And so then we got that hit in the Massillon State Mental Hospital. And then when I wrote, so the state records are sealed, but if you're a relative, you can write to the Ohio History Connection and get the records. So I was able to get the death certificate and then it had the address on there of where he had lived when he was admitted, and the address was the same as where Dad's grandmother was living in the 1930 census.
Wow, great detective work. Oh my gosh.
Thank
That
you.
is great detective work. Now, I would
later,
assume, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, we found out later that they had donated his body from Maslin to the Ohio State University cadaver program so that the potential doctors could work on it. And I felt good about that he would indirectly be contributing to science and research. So,
Yeah, because he has no grave.
right.
I see. Wow, what a story. What I can say is what a story. That is fabulous. Now, since he has no grave, and you were having, because you were family, you were able to access the records, but surely there must have been court records to commit him, correct?
I don't know. So he was committed in 1926. I don't know whether you could just have somebody committed at that time, or whether you would have to go through court. I don't know. And on his death certificate, it lists, so he died of pneumonia, but it lists other medical conditions not contributing to death. And that's where it says paranoid state. And it has the amount of time in there is 30 years and 17 days or something like that.
A word for all of us to learn from your experience, that sometimes when someone goes missing, obviously there's a backstory to what the story that's told.
Right.
That is really amazing.
Yeah, you have to not believe everything that your family tells you, because they might be hiding something.
Okay, in the chat box, the students are saying, what a great idea to connect with a university student from the area. They really like that tip in your presentation. They are also saying, without a connection like Alex, how would you recommend finding someone that can translate and speak to the local villagers?
Yeah, so like I said, we worked through Cobblestone. There's also Ukrainian tours. There are a lot of groups out of Canada. This has become kind of a tourist destination, especially in Western Ukraine. And so there are groups, if you have the money, that will take you there. A lot of times you need a lead. You need somebody who has a connection with a university or with the archives in Ukraine to make sure that they can get you in. When I talked to Cobblestone, the tour group that we used, I said, oh yeah, we're going to meet our, I called Alex our relative because I didn't want to explain it. So we're going to meet our relative over there and he can get us into the archives. And she's like, are you sure? Because, I'm like, oh, no, he'll get us in. Well, he did. But, I would arrange that ahead of time, make sure that you are working with a tour group that can get you into the archives, because a lot of times there's a wait list.
Suzanne,
as somebody, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
We went out of Toronto for two reasons. One, it's not that far away. It's less than a 4-hour drive. But two, it was $800 per person cheaper to fly from Toronto to the Ukraine than it was from the United States to the Ukraine. However, when we got to the Ukraine, they saw that we had originated in Toronto. They assumed we were Canadian. And we had to explain that we actually were Americans that drove up to Canada and flew out of Canada. And they were excited that we were Canadians because
that we weren't Canadians.
Pardon?
That we were not Canadians.
Oh, they were excited that we were Canadians because a large portion of the Ukraine has settled in Canada. But then when they found out that we were Americans, we became celebrities. Nobody from America came back to that part of the country to visit them. Yeah. So the whole village would come out. As we were standing on the road, people were coming out of their homes. Now, the village maybe had 400 or 500 people in it. But all of a sudden that here were Americans visiting their little village in the Carpathian Mountains and they were very excited about it. It made us feel very, very welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, that is beautiful. I got to ask, who put the 3 flags on the table for the lunch?
Well, so it turns out that Dad's second cousin, his name is Vasil. Yeah, his name is Vasil, but there were 3 Vasils in the group. So Vasil also had a cousin Vasil who had a son Vasil. So Dad's second cousin Vasil looks exactly like my dad's older brother, whose name is Nick. And it was spooky because they had the same mannerisms, they walked the same, they did the same thing with their hands. He's the one that's singing and doing the toast in the video. So we called him Vasil Nick. And he is, it turns out, the financial controller for the city of Uzhhorod. So he's kind of a prominent politician. And he had a connection with this restaurant, and he just called ahead and told them he wanted their best table and he wanted the flags on the table, and people made it happen.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful.
We had a meal for 15 people with all the drinks that you wanted, and I insisted on taking care of picking up the cost. The whole cost with tip was $110 American dollars. I was figuring at least $400 or $500, but everything is very inexpensive over there, very inexpensive.
Wow, that is amazing. I got to ask, did you ever find the grave of Stefan?
No, it's not important. I mean, it just seemed like, I think they know where it is, but nobody seemed to want to take us there. It was very, I get the feeling that cemeteries aren't that important.
It's a cultural difference.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Understood. Now, as a librarian, when I saw the condition of the archives, of course, my head was spinning,
Yeah.
And as a genealogist, of course, I mean, I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, this is just tragedy, complete tragedy. So I got to ask you, being that, a librarian, I know, when I help somebody, I know exactly where the book is on the shelf because everything is so well organized in an archive or a library here in our country. So I got to ask you, you found some real gems on your ancestors, but how in the world in that chaos did you find the books that you needed to find?
Well, they do have a worker at the archives, and she only speaks Ukrainian, and so they have a list of what they have, so they do know what they have there. So we were looking, we knew that we wanted that region, and we just picked any years that had anything to do with that region. And Alex and I just plowed through it. And then when we got the hit about Stavna, then we also asked for, we had originally only asked for the region that had Le and Volosyanka, but we added Stavna then, and we just went through. They won't let you take pictures of it's in that video that I showed about mafia-controlled archives. They don't let you take any pictures of the documents. Alex was able to sneak some pictures out to me from an earlier trip, so I've got quite a few pictures. But it's big business for them to have tourists come and pay somebody to go through. Either tourists come to go to the archives, or for especially Canadians to pay somebody to do the research for them in Ukraine. And so they don't want the records to be accessible. They don't want the records to be online because then they're not getting those American or US dollars.
There's a certain amount of logic to that.
Yeah.
If it's to support the local economy, it makes perfectly good sense.
Right.
Okay, let's see here. One of the students wants to know, what foods did you partake of that are not in the USA?
Salo is the big thing. They love salo there. And salo is basically like uncooked bacon. It's yeah, uncooked bacon. That was a big thing that they like to eat. We had a lot of borscht, all different kinds of borscht. It was very good. Oh, tell them about fishing, Dad.
Yes, we were taken to a restaurant that actually we parked in the field and we walked through a cow pasture and we walked across a log bridge and we walked up a hill and there was a pond there and they gave us fishing poles and we caught trout and then they fixed it right there and we with a complete meal it was very, very good, but it was, I mean, no way could you have done this in America because there was all kind of problems with this walking across the pasture, across the bridge. It had no railings on it. I mean, the hazard was unbelievable, but the fish was outstanding. We all four of us caught trout. So
Yeah,
it was.
and it was like a little family-owned thing, and then they had a big property there, and you went for a hike while they cooked your fish for you, and then served it with various salads.
I had one request when I went over there, and that was to have stuffed cabbage. When I grew up, my grandmother and my mother, that was a common meal that we had frequently. And it's not so common that you can find it around here. Our last night there, our guide took us to a restaurant, and I had stuffed cabbage that was probably the best I've ever eaten, at least as I could remember since I was a child. So that was good. But while we were in this restaurant, we were being entertained by live musicians, a accordion player and a guitar player, or fiddle, I'm sorry. And again, very, very inexpensive. It was a beautiful night. It was a great way to end up our trip while we were there.
Yeah. It didn't really help us, but I know something that Irina had told me. You'll notice that we're wearing our vashvankas, which are the traditional Ukrainian shirts. And a lot of times the embroidery, like if you have anything from your family, like a tablecloth or something that somebody's embroidered, the embroidery on the shirts will be from certain regions of the country, and you might be able to identify what part of the country your ancestors are from based on the embroidery.
So if you have a picture of your ancestor and there's embroidery, if you can enlarge it large enough, you can actually identify the area. That is fascinating.
Yeah, well, somebody who knows something about Ukraine might be able to identify the area from that.
I wonder if there are any books on the patterns. I know like for Scotland, for instance, the kilts, have, the pattern of the kilts have significance, and there are books published on that.
The Ukrainian archives in Cleveland has a whole room that shows different embroidery styles from different regions, so they would be able to help you.
Oh my gosh, that is really fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and Connie wanted to know if the top you were wearing is from that region, and she says it's beautiful, so she wanted to comment on that. And let's see here. As a genealogist, oh, go ahead, Jack.
We went to the open market while we were there. They have street markets all over, and we're able to buy whatever we wanted. Again, very reasonable price. Katie, tell them about the hat that you bought for Mitchell, my grandson, our son.
Yeah, my son wanted one of those Russian hats, the ushankas, they're called, like the Russian police wear. And so we were able to get an old Soviet surplus Russian hat at there was like a flea market, an open market that was in one of the cities. So he's real proud of that. He wears that around.
That is amazing. So Jack, do you feel fulfilled now that, you went all the way across the world to answer this question and found out that the answer was really in your backyard the whole time? Do you feel like, connected and fulfilled now with this venture that you took?
I would say more than fulfilled. I would say this far exceeded my expectations. Not only am I at rest with what happened to my grandfather, but I discovered a whole set of new relatives and members of the family that I did not know exist, and it's an ongoing relationship with them. I look forward to hopefully someday that they can come to our country and visit here. Maybe when things settle down, that can happen. But right now, it isn't happening, but we are communicating with them on a regular basis.
And I want to go back. I was kind of thinking about going back this summer. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, but you know,
my sister wants to go back and or go and visit the relatives as well. I have a younger sister. She was 5 when my mother died, so she's missed so much of what our culture was all about. But unfortunately, with the coronavirus going on, we canceled our plans to go this summer, but maybe next summer.
My last question that I have, unless anybody of the students have another one, they're all saying thank you for sharing your journey. But you know, you talked about the naming pattern for the daughters.
Yes.
You know, as a genealogist, you know, that kind of rings an alarm in my head when you got the missing Anna. Is there any possibility that there were 2 children that died in between?
Yeah, I did find in my records, I found a miscarriage, where, yeah, I found what I assume is a miscarriage. I found a child that was dead at birth. And so I'm wondering if that would have been an Anna, that was in this country, that was in Pennsylvania. So yeah, I'm wondering if that's why.
Yeah, because that thought occurred to me that maybe there were possibly 2 children that had not made it, and that might explain the variation in the naming pattern.
Right. Well, we have Mary as the oldest, and we have Helen. So we're missing one in there. But they also, you know, they didn't exactly follow they didn't follow it exactly, because the oldest son is Michael, not John. So the oldest son would have been could have been either of the grandfathers, because they were both Michael. And then there's a George, which doesn't follow. And then we have a John.
Last. George
What?
was last.
George is last.
Oh, George was last. Oh, I'm sorry. So it was Michael and then John?
John,
Yes.
and then George. Right.
So they did the grandfather and then the father instead of the other way around.
Now, if you go back, I got to ask, are you going to take DNA kits with you?
Well, Dad did his DNA, and it was funny because we did it through National Geographic, and they kind of show you like the path that your ancestors took out of Africa. And when we did Mom's, like hers goes into Europe, and there's all these branches that go like this, and Dad's, it's like whoop, they beelined for the Carpathians and just stayed.
Well, it would be very, very interesting if you could actually test your living relatives over there with a DNA kit. You know, goodness knows that, you know, it would be valuable DNA to capture.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, like I said, I talked to Luba, through translation, but, you know, I talk to Luba all the time. She's the woman that did the toast in the video. And even though she's Dad's second cousin, she's my age. Because she's like a youngest of a youngest of a youngest, and I'm an oldest of a middle of an oldest. So anyways, even though we're at different generations, we're the same age. And so I'm sure somebody over there would be willing to do that.
Now, did you get that picture of Stefan from them when you were over there?
Yes.
Did they give you other family photos?
Yes, I have some, and since then they've sent me things through Facebook Messenger.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I've connected with some other relatives over there, and I've sent them things. I also created, I can show you real fast.
Oh,
I don't know if you can see this, but I made trees to send over there, and the trees are in English and in Ukrainian, so the names that were the Ruthenian names are in they're in the Ukrainian alphabet, but then the names that are in, were here are in English. And so I made up these trees and I sent everybody that we knew over there a copy of the tree. And it says Hydanka family tree in English and in Ukrainian.
Wow. Boy, this is a really inspirational story. I mean, so many of my students have Eastern European ancestry. I'm sure Leon will communicate with you because I know Leon's been working on his for a long time.
Yeah.
This is definitely not only inspirational, but a lot of really great suggestions, reaching out, getting a local translator, getting a tour company that, is familiar with, family history needs. All these are great tips. And this is something we've talked about in my class before about the tour companies. And it is a really growing industry. So maybe perhaps not, like you said, not this year. I myself was planning to go to Norway this year to do some of my family history. But of course, with the virus, all that had to be canceled as well. So, hopefully next year will be a better year for travel. But that, on the other hand, gives everybody a chance to reach out, in advance, which was great advice that you both gave us. Find somebody local. And in a way, it's kind of interesting how doing a genealogy trip here in the United States is very similar to doing one overseas, because the basic steps is the same thing. You reach out to a local person, you find out who's knowledgeable in that community about that family, and make arrangements with that person in advance before you go, because obviously whether you're making a trip to New York or Iowa or across the world to the Ukraine, we're all on a limited time where we can be away from home, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever the case may be. So planning is the key to any successful genealogical trip, advanced planning.
And it was, when we were there, the relatives that day, they kept saying, why didn't you tell us you were coming? And we kept saying, we didn't know you existed until yesterday.
Don't rule out in these small villages going and finding the city council or the mayor. There's every village has one public official, and that's always a good place to start.
Great advice.
Usually they're well connected. They've been in the village their whole life, and they know the history of the people in there. So
yeah. And in Lou, we tried, but the village was so small it didn't have a mayor's office. So that was tough enough. But they didn't have one in Lou.
Now, you mentioned that the church records were pretty good, but the burial records were not. Did you have a chance while you were there to look at church records that were outside of the archives?
No, the archives had the church records. Our family was Greek Catholic, and the Greek Catholics kept great records. Now, I guess during the Soviet time, a lot of the Greek Catholic churches were converted to Russian Orthodox because the Soviets weren't as threatened by the Russian Orthodox churches as they were the Greek Catholic churches. So some of the Greek Catholic churches were destroyed. Some of them were converted to Russian Orthodox. But they had a lot of records there for the Greek Orthodox churches.
Once again, finding out about the history of the region of where your ancestor lived, not just, geopolitical, but religious as well. A very, very, very good piece of information, a very good tip.
Yeah, and that was the material books were the ones that actually got me to the alternate names.
Wow. Like I said,
told,
fabulous detective work. Fabulous.
Thank you.
We were told prior to going there that Ukraine was one of the 10 most dangerous countries to go to, but you have to be careful with that. Certain sections of the Ukraine, certainly those close to where the Russians are having the conflict, but where we were, believe me, there was absolutely no problem whatsoever. There were some armed people along the streets, but again, local knowledge of having a guide got us through that without any problem at all. And we were close to the Polish border, and there was a barbed wire fence along there, but you could see where the holes where they've cut through, and there's traffic daily going from Poland to Ukraine back and forth carrying goods. So it was an interesting experience. Yeah.
Well, that is wonderful. Okay, my last question I have is if any of my students would like to reach out and ask you questions, is it okay if I share your contact information?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you've got my Tri-C email. I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
Okay, great. Okay, well, with that, and thus, let me just scroll down here on the bars here to make sure that there's no other questions. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute. There are some questions. Jan said, my husband is Slovak, and he had stuffed cabbage for 18 years of his life. In Slovak, it's called, I probably mispronounced this, halubuki. Also, his relatives are from a village 300 miles away.
Yeah, there's a lot of Ruthenians living in that area of Poland, Slovakia, Ukraine. So it's very possible. Our neighbor here, when I started telling the story about how the area kept changing, and she's like, oh my gosh, this sounds like my family. And it turns out, yeah, they're from, my neighbor is from an area in Slovakia that's actually closer than that to where the villages are, probably about 60 miles away. And so I'm just waiting to try to figure out how I'm related to her.
Fabulous. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I was just going to say, the rumor was while we were there that there was a gentleman that had lived there all of his life, and I don't know how old he was, but he had lived in 5 different countries and had never moved. Right.
Let's see here. Todd wants to know, in small towns, do you go to the post office? They know everyone in town. So was there a post office there in the little town?
Well, like I said, no, in Stavna, we went to the mayor's, they called it the mayor's office. There was like one, city building. And that's how we picked up the mayor's secretary who took us to the Gutsan farm. I didn't see any public buildings there. There were 2 churches. There was like a little roadside restaurant thing. And I think that's it. It was very small.
Lots of cows and lots of horses walking down the road, pulling old buggies. We saw a lot of those. I mean, the very, very Spartan lifestyle over there.
Let's see here. Todd said that's what I did in rural Nebraska.
And that's what my mom's family is from West Virginia. And before we did this, I know my dad, especially, he and my mom spent a lot of time tromping through the hills in West Virginia and asking people. One of my mom's favorite stories is she was asking about if anybody knew where the old Davis farm was, because she thought it was like right there, and she was asking some woman who was outside of her house, and she said, do you know anything about this? And she says, no, I'm not really from around here. And Mom says, oh, where are you from? And she goes, that holler over there.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I think we've all got stories like that. Todd says, laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've all, I think, a big chunk of my class has gone, not just, nationally, but internationally as well. Patricia didn't log in today, but she went up to Canada and found a statue that was erected up there to one of her ancestors that she didn't even know existed until she went to the city of where he lived while he was alive. So these are like wonderful gems that we all learn when we get outside of our own, little areas of which we live and start learning about our ancestors. So with that, I'll let the class know that unless they have another question, I'll just give it a few more seconds here and see if everyone's just saying thank you, great class, great story, wonderful, okay.
Well, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to share it. It's really fun, and it's fun to see other people who have similar passions.
Oh, believe me, they do. They do. Okay, well, thank you very much, Jack and Katie. And all you have to do is just click on that red hang up button, And I'll say thank you much for your time and your expertise. It was wonderful. We really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Suzanne.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.